Last February, I had the chance to fly British Airways and visit the United Kingdom for the first time. Being from Argentina, BA is one of the carriers that has always flown to Buenos Aires. At times, it has been non-stop, and at other periods of time, with a stop usually in São Paulo. Currently, this last is the case, and so was it back in February when I had the chance to go on this trip. As passengers are not allowed to disembark the aircraft in Guarulhos, this makes up for a total 16 hours on the plane from Buenos Aires to London. It does sound like a lot considering we flew economy class, but was it too terrible? Stay tuned to have an insight into what it is like to fly 16 hours in British Airways Airbus A350-1000 in economy class. Before we get into the experience itself, it is worth mentioning that even though it would have been better to fly non-stop to London, as it would have gained us some time, we had the chance to fly the Airbus A350-1000 probably because of the stop at São Paulo. Before the pandemic, when we should have taken the flight, BA flew non-stop to Buenos Aires on a 777-200. I assume that if they don't fly direct these days, it is because there's not enough demand due to Argentina's complicated economical situation. But should BA put a direct flight, it would certainly not be on the A350, their newest flagship aircraft. So all in all, I definitely take the stop in São Paulo to fly this beast. Don't really know what the other BA aircraft are like comfort-wise, but this one was definitely a great experience. So, it is now time to throw it back to the moment when I was about to board the plane. The first thing that caught my attention when boarding, apart from the gorgeous Club World suites, was the boarding music. It made the ambience somehow classy. I liked the vibes, to be honest. On my way to the seat, I got a first glimpse of the cabin, which I really liked. It looked modern, though not too fancy at all. Once I settled down on my seat, I found out that the legroom is quite generous. I have not flown an extraordinary number of carriers long haul, but from the good experience I have, this is arguably some of the best I've ever had. Feature-wise, the seats are nothing too special. Waiting at each seat were a pillow, a blanket, and a pair of headphones for the flight. Each economy class seat features a coat hook on top, an in-flight entertainment screen with a headphone jack and USB port below, then some storage space for magazines which were not available due to COVID concerns, I guess, then an average foldable adjustable tray table, and a decent-sized seat pocket. At the moment, it reminded me about KLM's economy class on the 777-300ER I flew a few years ago, but those ones had some light blue touches that made them different, if you will. In this case, nothing that you would not find on any other carrier. This flight marked the start of a very long-awaited trip with my schoolmates, so before I even knew, we were taking off. The first part of the flight would be around 2.5 hours to São Paulo. I was pleasantly surprised by the fact that BA served a decent snack box in this short hop. It was nice to have something to eat, which made the flight pass by even faster. Eventually, we arrived into São Paulo. This first part of the flight is short, so up until this point, it is all good. However, this is the moment when you start feeling the early morning wake up to take the flight. The layover at São Paulo is around 2 and 2.5 hours, depending on what exact time the plane arrives. To be honest, in our case, we just spent the time hanging out around the plane, playing some battleships on the IFE, and some card games among us as well. It is fair to say that, because of all the hype, the stop did not feel that long. But for normal people, it probably was, as this was what then actually happened to us on our return flight. During the layover, there is a crew change, as BA crew served the London to São Paulo service, then the São Paulo-Buenos Aires-São Paulo, and finally, the São Paulo-London, all in different days, probably within 5 days I would guess. Also, cleaning crews boarded the plane and cleaned everything, leaving the aircraft ready for departure. It is safe to say that we did not make their job easy, as we were all around the aircraft, so cheers to their good job in spite of that. The good thing is that the flight to London Heathrow from São Paulo usually takes off on time. That was our case, at least. Having departed at 11:30 a.m. from Buenos Aires, it is already around 5 p.m. Buenos Aires time, and having woken up early, you start feeling tired. This was my case at least. I fell asleep after takeoff for a few minutes until dinner was served. Luckily, I woke up for dinner service, and it was a pretty good meal, which by the way, I'll review in next week's video in more depth. So subscribe if you don't want to miss that one nor any of the upcoming videos. After dinner, which all in all probably took like 45 minutes, the sun was clearly setting outside. Eventually, cabin lights were turned off, and this is the point where you are supposed to sleep. I was, indeed, quite tired at this time. I still had a few things to do before I could sleep though, so I started by reviewing the in-flight entertainment system, which was really good. I don't usually use it much though, but I did watch a sports documentary before I proceeded to try and sleep. Selection of movies, by the way, was also good, so for those of you who like consuming some of that while flying, there is a lot to choose from. After watching the sports documentary, I tried to sleep, but I couldn't. This was the perfect time to put on a movie on the IFE and fall asleep while watching it. But again, it is just not my thing. All I did was to stare at the map to see how much time was remaining. Eventually, I ended up sleeping no more than 3 hours. The night did pass extremely slowly. Don't get me wrong, the seats are really comfortable, and that was something that surprised me. The seat felt really good over the length of the flight, despite it being about 16 hours from one point to another. It is just a personal thing. I always find it very difficult to sleep on planes, and this was, unfortunately, no exception. I kind of expected this, so no surprise at all. By the way, throughout the night, glasses of water were distributed throughout the cabin by the crew on a few occasions. I don't know if there were things to pick at the galley, because I did not go. Without being able to sleep and having been on board for something like 12 hours already, it is normal that you start feeling uncomfortable. It is also a mental thing, as you try and force yourself to try and fall asleep. But again, in terms of comfort, the seat is quite good. So is the legroom while reclining the seat. Some airlines like American, for instance, move the cushion forward when you recline your seat, so your room is reduced. This is not the case. Even with the seat in front reclined, there is enough space for the legs. Somehow, time passed by and I made it to the second service, which was breakfast. It was pretty simple, nothing too elaborated, but I liked everything that was served. I don't usually like breakfast on planes, so I was happy I could eat something upon arrival. Soon after breakfast, we found ourselves approaching London Heathrow on what was a magnificent approach sequence, which you can see in the channel by clicking on the card above. Once on the ground, we went to Terminal 5 where we parked to finish off this 16 hours on board. You might now be wondering, was it too bad? No, it was not. The fact that there is a stop in São Paulo gives you the possibility to stretch a bit as well. But all in all, it was 16 hours on board, and while I was with my friends, I did not find it bad at all. The seat was surprisingly comfortable, it did not bother throughout the flight, and the service was fine as well. Even though I couldn't catch any sleep, which would have made my flight a lot faster, it was not too terrible at all. Now it is time to fast forward 3 weeks to the same place, London Heathrow's Terminal 5, but on the departures level this time, for our return flight back to Buenos Aires. After 3 intense weeks all around the UK, it is safe to say I was extremely tired. We made it to the gate just for boarding, as there had been some issues with some of my mates. All that rush made me wish to be on board as soon as possible to, hopefully, sleep for the whole flight. Boarding was unfortunately a bit delayed and quite messy, as they boarded 6 groups together. Maybe it was because of our group, that we were all mixed up, but it was quite disorganized. Eventually, I settled on my seat, which when I boarded was occupied by another passenger who had already opened my pillow. She was barefoot as well. All the situation was quite disgusting. Anyway, there was a flight delay which delayed our departure by 30 minutes. However, I spent the time trying to figure out how to make my phone camera focus with water drops on the window, and soon after, we were departing from London under the rain. This time, ironically, I fell asleep even before the dinner service started, but luckily woke up for the whole of it. Bear in mind that this flight departs at 8 p.m. from London, so you must have had a whole day prior to that, so you'll probably be tired by this time. In our case, we had been touring around the UK for 3 weeks on what was a magnificent yet physically very demanding trip. So as you can imagine, as I said, I was extremely tired. Dinner was pretty much the same as on the outbound flight. This time though, I messed up with my choice. I ended up eating some spicy rice meal which was not good at all. Shout out to BA's desserts though, in both flights they were incredible. Anyway, I did not bother too much about the meal. I was just looking forward to getting the trash out of my tray table and getting some sleep. Incredibly, for the first time in my life, I slept pretty much for the whole duration of the flight. Right now, as I think about it, it makes me think of how tired I must have been, my god. It is fair to say though, that I would have slept anywhere with all the tiredness I had. However, credits to BA's economy class seats on the A350 for being quite comfortable and allowing me to sleep that much. Eventually, an hour away from São Paulo, breakfast was served, which again was very similar to the one on the outbound flight. I like the content, so no complaints in that regard, but it is true that they could serve some hot option bearing in mind the duration of the flight and that they are one of the classiest carriers in the world. However, I was still happy with what I got. The stop at São Paulo was much calmer this time. All of my mates had slept all throughout the flight, just as me, and I used those 2.5 hours to hang out with them, as I was seated a few rows apart from the group. This was because I had changed my assigned seat at the check-in to have a window seat, just for the sake of the channel. This layover went by a lot slower than the one on the outbound flight. The mood was just not the same. We were all very tired and a bit down, because after all, this amazing trip was coming to an end. At this point, all we wanted was to arrive home. This is what usually happens when returning from some holidays far away from home. The return flight just seems extremely long. Anyway, I slept for most of its duration, and apart from the rather dull 2.5-hour layover at São Paulo, it went by pretty smoothly. We had a very pleasant and relaxed flight back home to Buenos Aires as well. There was a service again, which was nice to have, and also, if it hadn't been enough with 7 or 8 hours up until this point, I caught some more sleep on this 2.5-hour flight back home. This way, we made it to Buenos Aires, marking the end of this unbelievable 2022 UK tour. I had never slept this much on an aircraft, which in my opinion makes this flight with BA a very pleasant one. Anyway, I was still tired upon arrival. I needed like a whole day of rest still, but anyway. After a farewell to all my classmates and teachers, it was time to head home with my parents who were waiting for me at the airport. My final thoughts on British Airways economy class on the A350 are actually very positive. I might say that it's exceeded my expectations. The seat was comfortable, service was decent, the crew were nice, and the in-flight entertainment system was solid. I loved the A350 as well. I love it physically, and it was great to fly it for the first time. BA made me like flying the aircraft, even after being 16 hours on board, which means that the overall experience was definitely very good. So, now is the time when I want to hear from you. Have you flown BA's A350? Or any flight this long? What airline and aircraft did you fly? What was the route then? What was your experience like? Let me know in the comment section below. If you made it to this point, thank you very much for watching until the end. If you enjoyed the video and found it useful, don't forget to leave a like and subscribe to the channel so as not to miss any of the upcoming videos. There's a lot of content coming and some very cool trips ahead. Anyway, again, thank you very much for watching and I'll catch you next Friday. On to the next one.